This episode is proudly supported by Montague, handpicked for you.
So the eating experience of our plums is sweet. That's a primary driver. It's got to be sweet, but it's also got to have enough acid, because the mix of acid and sugar is what gives fruit its flavour. And in a plum, it tends to be slightly higher acidity. And then a really nice, full, not dry, but juicy explosion of juice into your mouth as you bite into it. That's nirvana for us in terms of plum.
For more information, go to montague.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Ngarrindjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
I want people to be able to open up a good bottle of wine like any night of the week, and so I want to be able to make wines at a really attractive price for people, but I don't want to undervalue the region either, so it's always been really tough.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Sam Watkins is a man with a plan. He's also the Winemaking Director of Watkins. With a long history in growing, making and selling grapes in the family business, he now stands beside his sister Jo and brother Ben, pursuing their love of wine. Hi Sam, thanks for joining me.
Hey, yeah, no, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on the show.
Well, I believe you were corralled on the show. I don't think you offered yourself up willingly, but I'm so glad that someone's pushed you into it.
No, I was. I'd go so far as to say I was eager to be a part of it.
Keen as.
Yeah, for sure.
Sam, tell me about your first memory that you have of wine, when you actually remember it being something you could consider or have a memory of.
Oh, look, I've been in a family who's been quite wine focused for a very long time. So I remember, well, the first memory that really stands out for me actually is the 1998 Chateau Ranella vintage port. I remember my dad, my brother and I went to, it was like an independent retail liquor store, something like Sip and Save or something like that, and got like a bottle of this vintage port, as we could call it back then. And we tried it, I don't know, a couple of nights later, and it was so good. And the three of us actually went back to the shop, and, well, I say the three of us, it would have been primarily Dad, as I'm not entirely sure I would have been of drinking age at the time. But anyway, I think that he went back and bought like all the rest of the stock they had of that particular port from the store. And, over the next few years, we continued coming back to this particular bottle and watching it evolve. And I mean, being able to have that experience with a wine is so cool, to watch it almost be a living thing and watch it develop in the bottle over time.
Especially port too. It's such a social drink, isn't it? I think everybody has a port story about sharing in a bottle, whether it's a good or a bad story. But I love that. And the fact that, yeah, like you said, you were able to get the last remaining stock of it, and then so did every time you open a bottle, did you do it together?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, he might have snuck a bottle or two with some other people, but I mean, you're right. Port absolutely is like a sharing drink. I don't think too many people are sitting down and cracking a bottle of port and polishing it off by themselves. It's not exactly a super healthy way to drink it. But the other thing about port is that it just has such long life to it. So you can hold on to them for such a long time and watch them evolve, over many, many years.
Yeah, it's so very true. And now your kind of story began back in kind of 1997 or maybe before that, but Fleury of Vintners is kind of where it all began. Can you briefly tell me how your business kind of has evolved to where it is today?
Yeah, so I mean, back in 97, that was before I was exactly heavily involved in the business, although I think that as a young kid, I was out in the vineyard helping them sort of plant up some stuff, and probably mostly just getting in the way and being a hindrance, really. But so 97, my family, along with the Randall family, bought some land in Currency Creek, and we started planting up this vineyard. And, that was a bit of a boom in the wine industry at the time. We planted up quite a big vineyard out in Currency Creek. But when you're just growing fruit, you're kind of at the mercy of the buyer if you don't have your own brand or anything. I mean, you've got this commodity that's sitting on the vine that sort of has to get picked in a very small window. And so if you've got a buyer sort of pushing back at you, it can very quickly put you in a poor, on the back foot in terms of business. So I guess that led us to, in 2005, we bought a winery in Chandler's Hill, which at the time we labelled Florio Vintners. And the business just sort of grew from there. So in 2013, we bought another big winery in McLaren Vale called Boars Rock. And we continued buying vineyards all over the place until in 2019, we split from the Randall family, became family owned. I'd already been working for the business for 7 or 8 years at that stage as a winemaker. But at that point, I became the winemaking director. My brother, Ben, was involved. He's the commercial director. My sister, Jo, came on board as a brand and marketing director and sales. And at that point, we started developing the brand that we'd been making these wines out of the grapes we were growing to be able to sell to other winemakers to put into their own products. But we started to build our own brand so we could actually share these wines that we've been making for years and years with people, and it's all just kind of grown from there. So that was just two and a half years ago that we launched the brand, and now it's getting out and about more and more, which is incredibly exciting to see as somebody who was sort of behind the scenes for so long.
Yeah, it must be such a different experience. But I kind of want to focus a little bit on exactly what you were saying. I mean, it is a young brand, but you've got a really long history of growing grapes and knowing what you're doing and making wine. Talk to me a little bit about, we've never really gone on into the podcast on the kind of the importance of growing grapes and selling grapes. And now you're having such a different experience with your own brand. And like you said, doing what you want to put it into bottle for yourselves. But tell me a little bit about the importance of kind of grape growing. And in particular, I want to focus on Langhorne Creek because it's such an incredible place. And I know you also make wine in the Adelaide Hills as well. But in particular, talk to me a little bit about growing grapes.
Oh man, okay. There's a lot of questions there, but I'll just try and sort of tackle them one at a time. I guess first of all, Langhorne Creek. I'm a huge advocate of. I love Langhorne Creek. When I first encountered it many years ago, actually the first main encounter I had with Langhorne Creek was coming to the Langhorne Creek Wine Show luncheon back before it was an official wine show, and I would have been like fresh out of high school, 19 years old or something, and I was just working as like a waiter at this thing, but fell in love with the region, and we've had vineyards here in the region I'm in Langhorne Creek right now, by the way. So we've had vineyards in the region here for it'll be 15 years, more than 15 years now, 17. And as a community, I fell in love with it, but also as you said, a place to grow grapes. Langhorne Creek has all these wonderful things going for it with, nice large open areas of consistent sort of soil profile, which make it really easy to produce blocks of consistent fruit, which make it really easy to work with. But then that's coupled with the fact that we've got Lake Alexandrina just to the south of the region, which acts as a massive evaporative air conditioner for the whole region. And so we get a great diurnal shift where we get some nice warm days, but very cool nights. And that means that the vine can sort of rest up at night and retain its natural acidity and beautiful varietal characteristics, but the warm days still help it to progress and ripen so that you still get a lovely generosity of fruit coming across in the palate. So, I mean, at the end of the day, growing really good fruit is critical to making good wine. You can't make a really good wine out of pretty crappy fruit. So, that's always been something really important to me and to my family. Now, we've sort of gone into the branded thing from the back end. A lot of people will start a wine brand and they'll be, buying fruit from people and making it somewhere. And then as the brand sort of grows, they'll shore up their supply and put some more capital into, a winery or actually owning a vineyard or, anything like that. We spent all these years building up the back end of the business, starting with our vineyards, then purchasing the winery and building up our experience and knowledge about the exact sites, the exact vineyards that we have, because that's even when you've had, a number of years of experience as a winemaker, individual sites, they're all different and it takes time to get to know how the fruit sort of wants to express itself from that site. So we went through all that and built all that up before we even started the brand, which meant that we were able to launch a really strong brand. I mean, coupled with the fantastic work that we had done in developing the brand assets and labels and all that sort of thing. And Sister Jo has put in so much into that side of things, which, is all so critical. So I guess it's just every aspect is important, and we've wanted to make sure that we could do each part of it, just how we want to do it.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's interesting because you're right. You have kind of gone the opposite way to what you not often see for smaller kind of brands, in that you see their developmental stages in each kind of vintage, like, we've worked out now that we're in our fourth year of this particular fruit that we could do this. And like you said, when I got to know you and I got to know a little bit about what you did, it made sense when you finally said, we're going to launch Watkins wine. And I was like, yes, finally, like that makes sense, because like you said, you had just so much knowledge of the places that you grow your grapes. And I mean, you've got quite a number of hectares now that 140, something like that?
Up to 155 now. We planted more this year because we wanted even more varieties. We're up to 17 varieties now as well.
Amazing. I mean, that's pretty exciting, and you certainly get your hands dirty. But being that Watkins Wine is a family-operated business, I want to know a little bit more about you, or just share a little bit more about you, because you're certainly a character and one of my favourite humans. You started your Bachelor of Oenology when you're 17, which is fairly young for such serious pursuits. I mean, I know it was in your family, but you didn't ever feel the need, at 17 to be kind of chasing parties and girls and general debauchery. You just thought you would get straight into tackling what you want to be?
Oh, I love how you make it sound like I didn't do both. No, 17 is a pretty young age to go into studying winemaking. So the uni thought as well, when they had to work out exactly how they were going to do the tasting component of the course with a few of us. Normally they were sort of spread out throughout the year down at the National Wine Centre. That was sort of the campus that they were doing that part from, but being underage, I couldn't actually participate in those bits. So they waited till the end of the first semester and sent myself along with a couple of others up to Wake campus, and we did all of our tastings there in like 1 week, like the whole semester's worth of tastings, which seems kind of crazy, actually, sending a 17-year-old to taste a semester's worth of wine in 1 week. But anyway, the way it was done. Look, I actually, going into uni, I had actually intended to take a different career path. Going through high school, I was convinced that I was going to go on to study civil engineering, and then it wasn't until the last second that I actually went with my second preference of enology, and I'm very glad that I did. I'm sure there would have been not a small bit of guidance, probably not even very subtle, from my parents in sort of helping me towards that path, but very glad that I did. It's been, I guess quite a journey. I think with something like winemaking, there's this expectation that you do move around a lot and learn from a number of different places about what you're doing, so you can get a more worldly view about, how to make wine. And I've had a lot of fun with that. And so when you say I wasn't out there chasing debauchery or anything. Well, yeah, when you're as a young, uh, newly finished studying winemaker, traveling around the world to different wine producing regions, there's plenty of time for that, I can assure you.
Well, I'm glad you didn't miss out on anything. That's good to hear.
No, never, never.
I know that your first vintage had an impression on you, and you do hear that, a vintage experience leaves a lasting impression. Paint the picture of what your very first vintage was like.
Well, the first vintage particularly made an impression in two ways. One of which is the fact that that first winery that I did my first vintage at is the winery that we've moved back into as a family. And so I've sort of started off there and then gone all around the world and come back to that winery now. So, I've got a huge amount of history with that site. But yeah, that first vintage was 2007, so I was 19 years old. And at the time, I didn't have my license. So I was staying at the Clarendon pub, which is 3Ks down the road from the winery. But for anyone that knows the area through there, that road from the pub up to the winery is very, very steep. And I was having to head up there on my bike at the start of every shift. And it would take me like 30 minutes to get up to work and literally 5 minutes to get back down to the pub at the end of shift. It was pretty intense. But at the start of vintage, I wasn't able to ride the whole way up to the top. And by the end, I could make it up without getting off my bike. So that was pretty satisfying to go through that. But yeah, that first vintage was night shift. I was working, I think the hours were like 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. It would have been 6 days a week, so 70 plus hours a week, and it was very different from any kind of work that I had done before. I had part-time jobs and stuff, and I think when I first started vintage, I was very aggressively challenged, and there were some points through it that, as a young person, it was like, am I ready to just give up on this? But I powered through it, and the more I sort of did it, the more satisfaction I got out of it. And I guess it's something that you almost get addicted to. It's this intense period at the start of every year where you're just so focused on that and getting through vintage. And when you do get to the end of it and you can sit down and look at all the wines that you've made, it's so satisfying. So, yeah, it had a very strong impression on me.
Understandably. So I feel like what you're saying is that vintage experience was uphill work and it was a slippery slope down to the pub. That is a pretty fitting picture.
Look, it would have been pretty tough if it was the opposite way around, because trying to get up that hill after doing a 12-hour shift would have just been brutal.
No, you would have just lived up there.
Yeah, exactly.
In 2010, you began working at Penfolds McGill Estate, because you've had such incredible experience internationally as well. But I want to know a little bit about what you learnt in communicating wine when you were working in the restaurant talking about wine.
I think wine communication, it's something that I've given a lot of thought. First of all, McGill Estate is a very high-end restaurant, but I never really got the hang of doing really sort of formal kind of service. That's never been how I want to interact with people. I like to be quite casual. I think, there can be a lot of wank around wines. And for people that aren't super experienced in the wine industry or just with wine, that can be quite an uncomfortable experience. And I don't like to see people uncomfortable, especially when they're, around wine. So even at McGill Estate, I go into it in a very casual fashion, formal enough to make people feel respected and everything. But I was really trying to just make people comfortable in there. And I found that got a really good reaction from people. When you've got people rocking up who were there for a very special occasion, but maybe didn't often go to that sort of dining restaurant, to have somebody, try and just make them feel comfortable in the space went a long way. So I think with wine communication, if people can be comfortable, and then the other aspect is finding a common language, that's the most important thing. A lot of the characters in wine are at high enough thresholds that almost anybody can pick up what's in there. If you spend enough time with them and do the training and get the experience, you'll likely be able to differentiate out the flavors that are there. You don't have to have the strongest nose in the world, but I think just learning the language of being able to convey what it is, well, first of all, being able to pick out what it is that you're smelling or tasting, and then being able to convey it, that's what it's all about. That's what wine communication is all about. A lot of these people that are doing a lot of wine judging and everything, what they've learned is this common language, so that when after all of us judges have tasted through a number of wines, and then we all go back to sit down and talk about them, we are able to convey what it is that we've tasted, and having a good memory for wines is very helpful as well, where you can think back and go, oh yeah, I did taste that thing. So yeah, I think that's what wine communication is all about. But also when it comes to wine, the most important thing is just being able to find out what it is that you like. And if you're able to communicate, as somebody who's getting started into the world of wine, if you can find out what it is you like and you're able to articulate that and communicate that to people, then you're going to be able to keep on coming across wines you like, and it's going to just make it so much easier to learn more and more about wine.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you're right, there's that, it's almost like the first hurdle with wine is whenever people say, I enjoy it, but they get really nervous with, I don't know what I'm tasting, or it's probably wrong. And it's just about kind of letting someone go, you know what, if you say the wrong fruit, it doesn't matter. If that's what you think you get, who cares? And it's just getting them through that first hurdle. But I also think with what you said about, being casual, is that you can always get more detailed and more nerdy and throw in more jargon, but you have to start somewhere with people. So I feel like if you can make someone feel relaxed, then you can get, if they're super highbrow and then they want to let you know that they know lots about wine, there's always a place to go. But if you start on this kind of top echelon then you don't have anywhere to go. So I think that you said that so well. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I think starting like down low and then, you can always go up. But I mean, so the other day, over this past weekend, we were at Cellar Door Fest, and that's the kind of event where you've got a lot of people coming by. You often have a relatively quick sort of touch point with people, but also you have a lot of newer wine drinkers coming to these things. And it's, when people come along to try my wines, I'm not going to try and flood them with information about it, about a whole lot of stuff that they might not even retain or care about. When people come along to try the wines, I'll give them a bit of information about it and then see how they go with that. And most of the time, I found myself going back to just talking to people about if they were having a good time at the festival and, what other brands they were going to go and check out, which ones they've already been to that they enjoyed, what wines they've liked so far. And then if they want to know more about the exact wine they're tasting, they can ask me questions, but that doesn't have to be what it's about. At the end of the day, wine is just there to be enjoyed, and you do that however you most enjoy it.
Yeah, so true. I couldn't agree more. Now, you've worked throughout numerous places in the world and had some amazing mentors. Can you give me like one example of, or something that's been particularly significant on your philosophies throughout that time?
Nailing it down to just one would be pretty difficult because part of the beauty of going and working at a number of different places for a number of different people is you learn something from everyone that you work with. So, I mean, when I worked with Philip Shaw and Orange, I worked bloody hard and some seriously long hours, and that's even after, comparing to vintages where I'd been working 12-hour days and everything. So, I mean, I was sometimes working up to 18-hour days doing that. And I think having done that, that was a handy skill to learn how to do that and, be able to keep focused in really long shifts like that. But it's also something that I learned that I don't want to put other people through, and I would much prefer to have more staff members and work them shorter hours so that they can stay engaged and just not have a really crappy time at work. I also worked with Sue Hodder at Wins, which was amazing because her Cabernet is just so good. And I mean, to this day, the Black Label Cabernet is one of those wines that every year I get a dozen of it and put them down in the cellar because they're the kind of wine that you can enjoy the hell out of at the moment, but also you can lie them down for years and years and years, and they just last so well. Fiona Donald at Seppeltsfield, super organized, really meticulous with how she goes about making all of her wines, and that's such an important skill to pick up. And more recently, working when I was at Boars Rock, I ended up working under Andrew Locke, who taught me so much about like culture in a workplace. I'd worked for some pretty poor culture workplaces, and he sort of taught me that, well, you don't have to operate like that. You don't have to squeeze the hell out of people. You can provide a really good place for people to work, and you'll retain more staff. They'll have a better time. You can have a better vibe on your site. So anyway, look, I've worked with a number of different people, and I try to learn something from everybody that I work with. So I guess in that sense, I've had lots and lots of mentors out there in the wine industry.
Well, it's always such an inclusive industry, and I think that, like you said, if you're somebody that's willing to learn and work hard, there's a lot of people out there that really want to pass on their knowledge, and if you're a sponge and you can soak it up, then you're pretty fortunate. And it's great to have, like you said, the diversity of experience that you've had. You're more than just an inhabitant of Langhorne Creek, though. You have been chair of the Langhorne Creek Winemakers Committee. Some might even go as far to say you could be the mayor of the Horn, perhaps.
Well, I don't want to toot my own horn or anything. As I said earlier, I just love Langhorne Creek. I think it's a great area. It grows some great fruit, and it's such a good community here. So it was many years ago that I first joined the winemaking committee. I was pretty fresh into the winemaking pursuit at that time, but they were looking for somebody else on the committee, so I thought, I'll give it a go. Why not? And I've just been on there a long time and sort of rose up to be chair. I think as much as anything, people just don't like giving speeches, and so they just sort of made me chair so that I would have to give the speeches, which I must say is not something I'm overly comfortable with myself either, but I think it's an incredibly handy skill that is something that you can learn to do, and I've always sort of pushed myself to do it so that I could learn more public speaking skills.
I forgot that about you, that you don't love doing speeches, and you're such a great communicator. You're such a talker. I just find it baffling that you hate speeches. It's bizarre, but I suppose they are a lot more formal, and you have to make sure you're thanking the right people. So, and I know a lot of people are freaked out by public speaking, aren't they?
Yeah, I much prefer to be having a conversation with someone and, be guided as to where it's going. Whereas in a speech, you have to have it all set out from the start and know what you're planning to say. And it just takes a whole organisation. And then there's all the people you're talking in front of as well. But anyway,
And heaven forbid you forget one person and then you're like, oh no, they'll never forgive me. Well, Langhorne Creek has a special place in my heart. It was the first region to invite me as an associate judge, and that just began my frenzy for all things wine judging, and I cannot get enough of it. It's also the first place that I ever had a West End draft. And it's...
Sorry.
which was epic, and I will never forget. But it's also the first place that I had... I met my fear of giant moths, which if anyone doesn't know that, I am terrified of moths. And there was a moth plague when I was actually there judging. And luckily you held my hand through it because I was completely freaked out.
Would we say held your hand through it, or would it be like forced you to face your fear? Probably reasonably, well, unreasonably. But I'm glad that that's what you took from that whole experience. So.
It was so emotional, I'm telling you. But I want to know from your point of view, what do you think Langhorne produces unlike any other region in Australia?
Oh, I mean, the one to go to would have to be Malbec. I mean, Langhorne Creek is getting quite a name for Malbec, and having tried Malbecs from around the world, and then having tried the ones here in Langhorne Creek, I think we're able to do such amazing purity of fruit coming through in them. I just love them. Actually, I feel bad. I have a glass of wine in front of me at the moment. I'm currently in the Bremerton cellar door. I just finished up some meetings down here, and so just had to go and find like a quiet spot. So I've perched myself up here, and so I grabbed a glass of their 21 Batonnage Chardonnay, which is going down lovely. But it was actually a toss-up between that and their Malbec, which is also looking awesome at the moment. So Malbec is one that is done really well in Langhorne Creek. But broader than that, I think there's this expectation out with consumers that Langhorne Creek is all about these big, heavy reds. But Langhorne Creek is, because of what I was talking about earlier with the evaporative air conditioner and everything, it can do such a versatile range of varieties. And I think more modern winemaking styles are getting people to not try and make something absolutely like the biggest possible wine they can out of fruit. People are sort of respecting the fruit and letting it present itself as it should. And so we're ending up with these more, I'd say, medium to full-bodied style reds coming out of Langhorne Creek that have this beautiful freshness to them. And it's not just Malbec. It's so many different varieties, from Shiraz and Cabernet to, I mean, personally, our brand really hangs its hat on Grenache. We grow a lot of Grenache, and we've got some stunning Grenache coming out of this region. But then you look at a producer like Kim Bolton, who's able to produce these amazing Montepulcianos. Then, you know, Bleasdale, Bremerton, Lake Breeze all have fantastic Malbecs. Cabernet in Langhorne Creek is so strong as well. So, I mean, we're so lucky that in this region we can grow all these different varieties so well, because I would get very bored if I could only grow one and make one thing. So that's why I've got, as I said, like 17 varieties planted in Langhorne Creek now. You know, they all have their own way of expressing themselves from Langhorne Creek. And I think as long as you can find how it should be presented, that how the fruit wants to be presented, you can make some fantastic wines out of all these varieties.
It's so true. And I think, you know, when you said, I think sometimes people do, if someone said, you know, they make these really big, heavy reds, I always was in disagreement, and I'd always say, I feel like they're incredibly concentrated, but gone are the days of those really alcoholic, over-extracted wines. Now I see so much finesse, and I just feel like the fruit is concentrated. And sometimes I think people can get a little confused with thinking that necessarily means that they're inky and alcoholic and heavy, but it's just great purity and density of fruit that it's almost effortless in Langhorne. And the other component I think that's often missed is the value of wine there. You know, if you know, looking at kind of dollar for dollar figure, I think the quality that you can get in Langhorne Creek for what you pay for them is you know, a little bit of a steal. So that's something else that I really love about the offering.
It absolutely is. Although I think that has been this thing that Langhorne Creek has been focused on for a long time, and we're actually just talking about, met a bunch of the others in a meeting, we're just talking about this earlier and saying, I think we need to start working on our narrative, and people get this idea in their heads about Langhorne Creek, you know, being good value and punching above its weight and everything. But I think we want to shift the narrative to just, like, rather than punching above our own weight, it's bloody good quality. You're absolutely right about that fruit density coming through. I mean, we get so much aromatic lift out of so many of these wines. That's what it's all about for me. And to be able to see beautiful, really expressive varietal wines that still have a lovely palate weight and, are filled out nicely so that they're not looking austere or hard or lean. That's the beauty of Langhorne Creek. And then they've still got this lovely acid line. So, and that means that also these wines, although they can drink really nicely now, you can still also put them down in the cellar. And, you look at some of the history of Langhorne Creek reds, you can pull out bottles from decades ago of wines that are just, the standard level of production of these great brands in Langhorne Creek, and they're just holding up so well even now.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. I suppose the other argument is that these are quality wines, and so they should demand a quality price point. So but I've always thought even if you bumped it up, slapped an extra $10, $15 on a bottle, it's still probably going to be really affordable anyway, you know what I mean? So you have to back yourself with that too and say these are quality wines. I know we're known for value, but that doesn't mean that we can't demand what we think our wines are worth as well. So yeah, but you could argue both points for sure.
It's always been it's a tough one for me. I'm kind of torn because I want people to be able to open up a good bottle of wine like any night of the week. And so I want to be able to make wines at a really attractive price for people, but I don't want to undervalue the region either. So it's always been really tough trying to find that, toe that line between where to set a price point.
Yeah, very true. Now, Sam, you've never been shy of being able to pick out a drink for yourself. If you could only drink 3 drinks for the rest of your life, what would they be and why? And don't disappoint me, you've got to say the red tinny.
Well, actually, I've kind of moved on the last couple of years from red tins to yellow tins. Have you had the Henty Street Rover?
No, I have not.
That is actually a delicious beer, and it's sort of a little bit crafty, but not too craft beery. It's still just super smashable. So actually, I would have to say that would be one of them. Then the other 2 would have to be wines, and that's going to be really tough because I don't know whether it would be sparkling, Riesling, or Cabernet. I think I'd probably have to land on Riesling and Cabernet because they're the 2 wines that I can drink really young or really old. I'm not necessarily huge on aging all types of reds. For things like Grenache and Shiraz, I tend to prefer them really young and fresh and vibrant. But Cabernet, and same with Riesling, I can just have it either way. When they're really young and they've got that lovely freshness to them, Cabernet's got that leafy mint to it, and Riesling will have that, particularly from Clare, that citrus and lovely minerality. Then you age them and the Riesling turns into something richer and more complex, and the Cabernet just softens off and becomes so smooth. And I think that'd be it. Riesling, Cabernet, and my beloved yellow tins.
Yellow tins. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like you've moved on without me, and I'm a bit upset by that. But that's okay. I can always...
It's all right. There's time for you to catch up.
Okay, fair enough. Look, I have to agree with you, Riesling and Cabernet. I actually am starting to have more Cabernet in my cellar more than anything else because I too am just such a big fan of how they change and evolve and become these ethereal, nuanced, delicate things. They're just amazing. So 3 very good choices, and I did expect that from you, so thank you.
I'm glad I didn't disappoint.
Not at all. Sam, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I'm glad that you were cajoled into it, and I always enjoy our chats, and I hope that I get to see you sometime soon. I know that I missed you last time you were in Sydney, but I hope we get to catch up another time, and you can introduce me to this new phantasmagorical beer.
Oh, yes. Next time you're in Adelaide, you'll have to come round and I'll just load you up with yellow tins.
Excellent. I'm going to hold you to that. Well, actually, I'm going to be headed over there for Taste Australia, so I don't know if you're going to be part of that, but hopefully I can catch you then.
Lock it in.
Awesome. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Sam. It's been wonderful chatting, and we'll chat soon. Cheers to you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.